What's up? What's going on, guys? CaptainMonk here. Today's video is going to be something a little different from my usual live full game commentary. However, I will admit this is a video I've been meaning to create for a very long time. I feel that with the multiple recent changes to Wukong and how they've affected his current state in the League of Legends, it's my duty as a Wukong main to share my thoughts and ideas. Like me, King Kong Lol, a fellow Wukong main and League of Legends YouTuber, has made a video sharing his ideas for Wukong Rework design. His concept, while interesting, differs from my own, but has laid the groundwork for how it is I would like to approach producing this video. I'll be transparent in saying that a lot of thought has gone into my design and the reasoning behind every detail within it. All this to say, I'll do my very best to give a concise proposal and explanation of the main points for the rework earlier on the video. However, I'll be going to great depth about numerous different elements for the majority of the video to support my opening proposal. Before I get started, I'll let you know that the footage in the background is of myself playing Wukong jungle in normals. With the recent attack speed buff to Wukong following multiple nerfs to both of his main damaging spells and his go-to rune Electrocute, I thought it'd be interesting to see how the press the attack Wukong would perform with a tankier Triforce build rather than the lethality build you would often see. And now that that's out of the way, I'd like to present my reasoning for why I believe Wukong should be a top contender for a visual gameplay update throughout the 2019 season. Look at this face. Does this look like the face of a healthy champion? Maybe my eyes deceive me, but what I see is a malnourished, grumpy champion that is indifferent whether he lives or dies. Not to mention, check out these huge hands, and sausage fingers. I understand that Wukong's a monkey, and is likely to come accompanied with larger hands, but this is just too much. I want to be clear that my goal in pointing this out isn't to insult Riot's Wukong model design. This model was created way back towards the end of Season 1, and was likely considered a very good model at the time. I just feel it's very important to point out the flaws with the old model if I'm to persuade a visual update for the Monkey King. No offense intended. I found a fan-made Wukong model online that I think is a good representation of a base for what Riot could aim for with a Wukong visual update. I specifically like how the model has Wukong smirking, similar to how he smirks in his base splash art, expressing that confidence we know Wukong to have. I also like that while his hands are still large, they appear to be smaller than the current Wukong model we've got, and more appropriately shaped. If I were to make a complaint about this model, however, it would be actually a complaint that applies to both models. Wukong, in my opinion, is too skinny. I don't need him to be the Hulk by any means, but some size and some toned muscles wouldn't hurt. My next point of argument supporting a Wukong gameplay update is the popularity of League of Legends and Sun Wukong from Journey to the West in China. To begin, this is a graph I found on Reddit showing the total player base per region for all of, or at least most of, the League of Legends servers worldwide. Notice how China is at the top, containing more than half of the world's total League of Legends players. I won't sit here and tell you this is exact or precise, but what I will say is I do believe this is accurate. League of Legends is incredibly popular in China, there is no doubt of that. What is also popular in China is the story of Sun Wukong from Journey to the West. Being from North America myself, I'll admit I don't know much about Journey to the West or Sun Wukong outside of League of Legends. With that said, after doing a quick Google search inquiring how popular is Wukong in China, one of the first links brought me to this webpage. Every responder to the question confirmed Wukong's popularity amongst the Chinese people, children, adults, and elders alike. Responders even stated that Wukong's story is the most popular tale in all of China. All this to say, if China has the biggest player base for League of Legends worldwide, and Wukong's story is the most popular tale in all of China, then why has Wukong historically been forgotten and not made suitable for higher levels of play? This brings me to my final point supporting the production of a Wukong visual gameplay update. Wukong's current gameplay state within the League of Legends. About a month ago, I made a video, How Wukong Became the Best Champion for Climbing Solo Queue. Throughout the video, I supported my title statement with impressive win rate stats and evidence showing Wukong's ease of play and versatility. Since having posted this video, Wukong has received not one but two nerfs, hitting both of his main damaging non-ultimate spells, and a nerf to his go-to rune Electrocute. This made Wukong undeniably one of the weaker champions in the game. What's most interesting about all this is that despite these nerfs, Wukong still performed adequately in lower elos, maintaining around a 50% win rate. However, in higher elos such as Platinum and above, Wukong wasn't able to win half of his games, and even dipped as low as a 26% win rate in North American Diamond throughout 2 days of nearly 80 games in Diamond. Now I know we can always point the finger at NA Diamond, best region, or whatever, but memes aside, Wukong's kit was completely failing to be relevant and translate outside of the lowest levels of play. Now, the recent buff to Wukong's attack speed has brought his stats back up for all ranks of solo queue. However, I do feel this buff is just a band-aid to a large wound underneath that only a rework can truly fix. This large wound I speak of represents Wukong's kit fundamentally not being suitable for the higher levels of play. The fact of the matter is, buffs and nerfs aside, climb to the higher elos and the lower the Wukong win rates will go. This is because Wukong only has so many ways for how he can go about being successful. Better players are aware of this and know how to counter this limited playstyle. Wukong may have seen some professional play in Season 4 when the Elder Lizard jungle item was still in the game, and we did see a little bit of Wukong play recently in the Europe LCS before the nerfs came through. I of course could be missing some other prime examples of Wukong being picked up for other pro play, but my point here is that generally speaking, Wukong's kit historically has not been played much as it has not been suitable for pro play. While Wukong players certainly have climbed to any and all elos with his current skill set, it's evident that Wukong has always been most suited towards low elo stomping. I am of the understanding that Riot strives to develop their game towards being balanced and diverse at all levels of play. I could of course be wrong in this understanding, but if what I am saying is at all accurate, it would seem as though Wukong has been left behind and forgotten. I had been wishing Wukong would receive a visual gameplay update for a long time to improve the health of his kit for all levels of play. It would appear now is as good a time as any for him to receive one since Wukong has been struggling for a very long time. His model looks unhappy, and the largest demographic of the League of Legends player base would be thrilled to see their favorite character's potential fulfilled on the international stage. Without any further ado, I present to you my concept for the Wukong Rework. To begin, my design includes a new passive, Journey to the Top, where Wukong can pole vault over terrain such as walls or trees. He can also choose to perch on this same terrain, unlocking some new skills within his spells. Crushing Blow is no longer an empowered basic attack, but rather a target ability that places on-hit effects. When casted outside of immediate effective range, Crushing Blow becomes Reaching Strike, a skill shot with various effects. These effects hit multiple targets in a line AoE and stun at the end of its range. Using Decoy, Wukong will now only very briefly stealth, however, the decoy created will walk in a straight line in the direction casted. This decoy will walk in the set direction until it times out, is blocked by a wall, or destroyed. Nimbus Strike is now a skill shot that can knock over walls, however comes along with a new effect, Nimbus Ride, that can be accessed while perched. Nimbus Ride enables Wukong to glide over walls and create his new combo. Wukong rides a set distance, scaling with his total move speed. Wukong's new ultimate, Stone Cyclone, no longer has a knockup, but in exchange deals an additional HP percentage damage. There's also a new effect slowing targets facing away from the Cyclone. Lastly, I've updated Wukong's old passive, Stone Skin, increasing damage reduction percentages per enemy within the effective range. Before I get any further discussing my Wukong design, I want to make a disclaimer. You may notice some similarities within my Wukong design when comparing to other Wukong entities in other games. Wukong is a common character within MOBA titles. Aiming for a completely unique kit is unrealistic, being that all Wukong iterations are based on the same Wukong from Journey to the West. I believe Riot should focus on making their design of Wukong the best, rather than forcing unnecessary and unrealistic innovation. Before I dive into the specifics of the new kit for Wukong, I want to first address the issues with Wukong's old kit so we can more directly assess how my design addresses these issues and solves them. Wukong's current kit is outdated. The main evidence to this is displayed in how unhealthy his gameplay is to play as, alongside of, and against. When playing as Wukong, you normally only have one strategy in mind for how you can be a useful member of your team in your shared vision of destroying the Nexus. Kill squishy champions. If Wukong fails at this, he usually fails at being a relevant member of his team. While being very good at split pushing, with his high attack speed and his Crushing Blow spell applying bonus damage to towers, he does not have the best ability to escape once separated from his team unless his opponents are easily fooled. The tools at Wukong's disposal may shred through a lot of armor, however he does not have what is necessary to take down tankier champions. Nor does Wukong have the choice of going at anything less than all in on his target. Either he goes balls to the wall and comes out on top, or he falls short. The only in between being if Wukong can pull off a miraculous juke, which is a rarity. Playing alongside a Wukong is toxic. Some of you may be surprised to hear me say this, but it's the truth, and I'll be the first Wukong main to admit it. This is the case because of how much gold Wukong players funnel onto themselves in order for them to take the entire enemy team by storm, to ensure the character's relevance in the match is present. Without this gold, Wukong will fail often at his job of comboing groups enemies and taking down at least one enemy champion. Wukong has no reliable way to escape once attempting a combo, so the hope is he can at least bring down one champion before he feeds. This leaves his team cornered when it comes to their own scaling because they have to choose whether they wish to funnel gold into Wukong so that his suicide bomber strategy pans out positively, or play out a game that feels similar to a 4v5 versus fed champions. Playing against Wukong can be exceptionally easy if the Wukong fails at his early assassination attempts. He will go in with everything he has time after time without any power behind his punch, and he will die. He may try to juke his way out to safety using his decoy spell, but it is very easy for the average player to see right through this charade. On the other hand, if Wukong were to be successful early on in the game, he will follow that up with immense damage from his multiple targeted ability combos that devastate champions from out of nowhere, leaving enemies wondering what they could have done differently. Oftentimes, all that's left is the choice to play League of Legends. In summary, Wukong lacks versatility in how he can go about being successful, and when he does get ahead, he becomes an impressive opponent with little counterplay. The goal of my rework is to grant Wukong more options when utilizing his kit to outplay and outsmart his opponents. Wukong should have options to enable potential when playing from behind, and his enemies should have the ability to outmaneuver his oppression when Wukong is ahead. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the specifics for each one of Wukong's spells and his passive within my rework. As stated earlier, I'm giving Wukong a new passive called Journey to the Top. Journey to the Top would be accessed by double-clicking any terrain generally inaccessible to champions. Wukong would approach the wall as any other champion would when casting movement towards them, except Wukong would actually hop up onto the terrain and perch there. Wukong can cast movement again after completing his mount to unmount the perch to the direction casted. He can also cast movement before completing his perch, allowing Wukong to gap the wall through pole vaulting if he so chooses. The speed at which Wukong uses his passive scales with movement speed. If Wukong takes damage while casting his passive, he will fail to mount the wall. If Wukong takes damage while perched, he will fall from the perch towards the side he took damage from. I believe the pacing for Wukong's new passive should be very similar to Fizz's use of Playful Trickster. There's a lot of similarities here, such as of course balancing upon their weapon, Wukong being his staff and Fizz being his trident. I do believe the single cast Playful Trickster is a good representation for the pacing in which Wukong should be able to use his passive earlier on in the game. Difference being of course that Wukong wouldn't be untargetable or begin by hopping through the wall, and he would follow that with landing upon the wall or beyond the wall rather than creating a splash. Come later into the game, after Wukong has built some movement speed, he could then hop up onto the wall or beyond the wall with pacing that rival that of Fizz double casting his Playful Trickster. I do think it's important for the sake of balance for Wukong to have a per wall cooldown for which he can use his passive, very similar to Talon's E usage, so that he can't just repeatedly hop up onto the same wall. What is different though that makes me believe this would be balanced in League of Legends is champions like Talon do exist, and champions like Kayn do exist. Talon's able to hop from wall to wall to wall to roam the map more quickly than pretty much any other champion, and Kayn's able to go through a lot of walls all in one swift stroke. So this makes me believe that while Wukong may be benefiting himself and creating some strength with this new passive, it wouldn't be broken. This then brings up the question, what's the benefit in hopping up onto a wall? Especially when champions like Talon, Fizz, and Kayn exist who can just hop over the wall or glide through it much more quickly than Wukong can early on in the game. Admittedly, Wukong's new passive isn't a huge game changer on its own, but being able to hop up over walls definitely helps him as a jungler, especially since he gets stronger as the game progresses. Current Wukong is only able to go over walls without summoners if there's a visible target on the other side for Wukong to Nimbus Strike to. Since I am removing the ability to go through walls with Nimbus Strike, Wukong's passive will provide him the right amount of ability to step up his game. It's also important to note that majority of what makes Wukong's passive strong lies in its ability to combo with Wukong's Crushing Blow and his Nimbus Strike, which are two spells we haven't talked about yet. Up close, Wukong's Crushing Blow will feel very similar to current Wukong's, however it will now be a targeted spell, improving the overall quality of life when casting Crushing Blow. This is similar to the change they provided Talon's Q when he received his rework. Casting Wukong's Q outside of effective range for Crushing Blow turns the spell into Reaching Strike. Reaching Strike will always reach to the max range in the direction cast at 650 range. This would be a slower cast time when compared to his short-ranged Q. If the target is anywhere inside of max range, the spell will have its weakest effect, simply applying the spell's base damage with no additional benefit. Solid poke damage for lane maybe, but with underwhelming bonus effects. If the target is hit by Reaching Strike within the final 50 range, the champion hit will be briefly stunned in the ground from the sheer force and momentum of Wukong's staff. The target's armor would be shred as well, by similar numbers or more to current Wukong's Q armor shred. This is somewhat inspired by Donkey Kong's Side B combo from Smash Bros, where he crushes his enemies into the ground, causing them to be briefly stuck. I think it's important to note as well that with Wukong's new long-range Q, that since it is a skill shot, it should be able to interact effectively with Flash, to back up, move forward, or sidestep the area of effect of the spell by flashing during the cast animation. Casting Decoy will spawn a decoy walking outwards from Wukong in the direction of your cursor. Wukong will only very briefly stealth as he casts the spell with a decoy icon popping up shrouded in clouds, followed by the decoy and he visibly running. This should appear similar to LeBlanc's clone passive. This decoy would walk in the direction given as far as it can until it hits a wall, dies, or expires. Wukong's decoy will always share the same defensive stats as the host Wukong to avoid giving away which one is real. Wukong's new Nimbus Strike is now a skill shot instead of being a targeted spell. This means that Wukong can now use his Nimbus defensively as well as offensively. It's important to note, however, that since Wukong's passive allows him a lot of mobility in and around walls, Nimbus Strike will no longer go through walls. The damage from Nimbus Strike will now be an AoE blast at the end of the casted destination, rather than a single target spell that could hit an additional 2 targets. The range of the AoE will remain the same as the reach of current Wukong's for the additional targets. I'm indifferent whether the attack speed boost remains or is removed, as with the base attack speed buff Wukong has received currently, he may be fine without any extra. Wukong's Nimbus Ride on the other hand isn't so simple. Nimbus Ride can only be used when you have already perched on terrain using your passive. While riding, Wukong can glide over anything and everything. Nothing stands in the way. Though Nimbus Ride is incapable of doing any damage on its own, it is used as a mobility tool and a setup tool for a new Wukong combo. Wukong will always ride at slightly faster speed than Aurelion Sol's Comet of Legend. However, the distance you can reach scales with movement speed. Early game ganks will not be greatly benefited by Nimbus Ride. However, later on into the game with boots and movement increasing items at your disposal, Nimbus Ride can become a great asset. While riding, Wukong is untargetable, similar to the new Akali when she's within her Twilight Shroud, but he can still be hit by projectile spells. Wukong is immune to slows while within Nimbus Ride, but any hard CC or silence will end the ride. A shadow will be shown moderately ahead of Wukong's trajectory, giving his enemies a good warning for where Wukong is going. Wukong can end Nimbus Ride by casting movement in any direction. Nimbus Ride will end on its own at the end of its effective range, and there is no penalty to ending Nimbus Ride early or by letting the range cap out. Wukong would swiftly and safely fall to land if his ride is uninterrupted. Wukong can create his new signature combo at any time after casting Nimbus Ride before reaching max range. The combo is created by casting Crushing Blow, Wukong's Q, while riding. This will cause Wukong to come crashing down, smashing his staff into the ground, damaging and knocking up all enemies within the range. Upon beginning this combo, Wukong becomes targetable once again, becoming an easy target to knock away and disrupt before he can complete this combo. The damage applied is the same as Wukong's Crushing Blow damage, and the knockup is somewhere between 1 and 1.5 seconds, possibly depending upon how close to the center of the AoE targets are, or how balanced different knockup durations would be. The range of this damage and knockup is the same as the reach for Wukong's ultimate, creating a perfect segue into using Stone Cyclone. Wukong is able to flash after casting Crushing Blow in this combo to reposition the damage and knockup. I would expect to see Wukong's combo used this way with flash frequently, as the cast range is rather limited to beneath Wukong within his Nimbus Ride. And finally, I'd like to share with you the details for Wukong's new ultimate, Stone Cyclone. To begin, Stone Cyclone does not have a knockup. However, it deals an additional 8% total HP damage a second as extra physical damage. I would expect the base damage to be slightly reduced in light of this. Targets facing away and fleeing from the Cyclone will be hit by a mild slow if they are outside of the Cyclone's effective range. Somewhere between 75 and 100 range outside of the Cyclone is the reach I had in mind for this slow. This would act as a way to, of course, keep targets within the range of the ultimate so that more damage can be dealt. I mentioned earlier that I'd be moving Stone Skin, Wukong's old passive, to this ultimate. This is in fact the case, and you will feel the effects of this throughout the 4-second duration of the ultimate. Stone Skin now provides Wukong bonus damage reduction that scales with the amount of enemies within his Cyclone's damaging range. The damage reduction adds up to 50% damage reduction, receiving 10% per champion caught in the ultimate. While receiving damage reduction, Wukong gradually turns more to stone, becoming completely stone-skinned when 5 champions are nearby. Turning to stone doesn't directly do anything further, it just gives his enemies a heads up how tanky Wukong has become, and looks cool. The Stone Cyclone will also change color slightly as stones are picked up and Wukong turning more to stone from the scaling of the damage reduction Wukong is receiving. If we were to now come back and discuss the goal of this rework and how all of these changes that I'm suggesting for Wukong apply to the goal in giving Wukong more options for how he can outplay and outsmart his opponents, but also make it so that he has more counterplay so that when Wukong does get ahead, his opponents have a way to maneuver in around his oppression. I think the best way to break this down is to start off by looking at all the roles that Wukong plays within, being top, mid, and jungle. So if we were to start with top lane, Wukong's very limited. He's only really able to be strong in the top lane if he can just outbrawl his early game opponent. But if it's a champion like Darius or Garen, Wukong just ends up farming a tower and missing a lot of farm too, since he doesn't really have the best wave clear tools in his E or his Q, being that his Q is single target and his E can only hit up to 3 targets and frankly costs a decent amount of mana if he spams it. We are now going to be able to wave clear a lot more effectively with Wukong having the option for an AoE Q, but it also gives Wukong that range so that if he is against an opponent that he is losing against, he can sit a bit further back. This does not mean though he's going to sit back like a sniper. 650 range is the same range that Aatrox has on his first Q, so Wukong would still be standing there using that ability, and if he misses the lineup to hit the stun, he is then only doing damage and it leaves himself vulnerable after having stood there. So Wukong players will have the option and the ability to stand a distance and farm more safely against their lane opponent, but it won't be a free ride, since if they don't align their Q correctly and lock up their opponent, they're going to leave themselves vulnerable to take damage, but giving them that option to survive that lane will be very, very good. Wukong's passive probably wouldn't do much in the top lane, since if he wants to hop on walls, that's great and stuff, and maybe he'll get off some good engages, but using Nimbus Ride to engage a fight actually leaves Wukong with less damage potential, since Nimbus Ride does not do any damage. Keeping in mind, Nimbus Ride and Nimbus Strike share the same cooldown, just as the Q effects, whether it's the short range version or the long range version, share a cooldown. So if Wukong was to hop up onto terrain and Nimbus Ride in, he may have an easier time getting to where he wants to be, but he'll be missing out on Nimbus Strike's damage. So it's very infrequent that Wukong would do that unless he is roaming and making a gank mid lane, bottom lane, or invading his opponent jungler while he is playing top lane. With Wukong's new decoy, rather than being a get out of jail free card where Wukong of course would use it when he's fighting and would just go stealth and leave his decoy in the lane to spin and maybe hit his opponent target, now Wukong will have to be a lot more intelligent about how he goes about using his W in the lane. He of course can use it to juke his opponent, but it might also just leave him wasting mana and gain himself into just as much trouble as he was already in. And that's I think where this rework kind of comes into play a little bit, is instead of Wukong dashing into the fight and trading with his opponent top laner, and then using his decoy as a get out of jail free card upon wasting all of his spells and a lot of mana, Wukong can now be a lot more cunning in how he uses his W to juke his opponents, but also can be a lot more punishing if he is less experienced with the spell. Looking at Wukong's E as well, something I want to mention with Wukong in the top lane, is now Wukong can choose to trade if he gets into melee range, and he actually can now use the Nimbus Strike to dash away if he's looking to walk up and farm and then dash away to safety. And this is kind of where I think Wukong might end up using a lot of his mana, and that will still be the bane of his existence in the top lane, is wasting his spells and his mana when he doesn't need to. And the best Wukong top laners will find a way to manage their mana despite these mana costs, but the worst Wukong players will find themselves needing to use their Nimbus Strike to safety all the time, and needing to use their Q from a distance to farm, and needing to use their decoy to juke their opponents, leaving them without any mana and cause them to die a fateful death. And lastly, now with Wukong's ultimate, he is able to do a little bit more damage to tanky champions who are plentiful in the top lane. Previously, Wukong was unable to really take down tanks. He may have high damage and high armor shred, but if a champion's just stacking HP, Wukong just will not outdo them, no matter how hard he tries. But now with Wukong's new ultimate and a little bit more poke within his kit, Wukong's able to whittle down these tanks, and from there go all in with his ultimate, doing alarming damage, which is very important I think for Wukong top to be viable. Now if I was to summarize all my rambling into something a little bit more comprehensive, with my changes, Wukong can now effectively choose between farming, trading, juking, or going all in, whereas currently Wukong doesn't have a good ability to farm in the top lane, nor can he trade with most champions, and if he jukes them, it's usually their own fault for being gullible. His only strength was really just to go all in, and if he came up on top, great. If not, he would take what scraps come to his tower and roam, which isn't really what you want out of an effective top laner. But now to cover my bases and make sure that me giving Wukong so many options wouldn't make him a more oppressive opponent, because of course the goal of this rework is so that if Wukong does get ahead, his opponents still have more ways than currently to play against him and maybe take him down a notch. And the reality is since Wukong has so many skill shots, the bottom line is Wukong's skills can be more easily evaded. He has a higher skill cap, and it's a challenge to manage his mana since he has so many more uses for his spells. You know, his Crushing Blow, it is still a targeted spell, and that's the one thing that can't be evaded, but since it no longer shreds armor, Wukong's all-in potential when he just goes balls to the wall, Nimbus in, Crushing Blow, ult, will be a lot lower. He no longer has that knock-up to keep him crowd-controlled there. He does less damage since there's no armor shred there, and the Nimbus Strike can be evaded, so if Wukong Nimbus strikes in and misses, he's putting himself in a very dangerous position where he will have to rely on juking his way out, since the long-ranged Q will not land since he's already next to his target but missed the Nimbus Strike. There is a lot more counterplay with Wukong now. When it comes to discussing mid lane Wukong, you might notice a theme that a lot of the information I'll be bringing up might be a little bit familiar from our top lane discussion, and with that in mind I will do my best to bring up mostly new information. However, expect a certain amount of overlap since playing in top lane as Wukong is relatively similar to playing as mid lane Wukong. One of the main things that comes up as a big difference, of course, is the champion base that plays in the two different roles. Mid lane tends to be more mages and assassins, top lane tends to be more tanks and fighters. Tanks and fighters present very similar difficulties for Wukong, whereas mid lane, when there's assassins and mages, they present very different difficulties, and I'm going to try and focus on the differences between the two and how my kit solves Wukong's ability to fight back against assassins, but also fight against mages more effectively than current Wukong does. To begin, I want to make a bit of a disclaimer in saying that mid lane Wukong actually has the highest win rate of all of Wukong's rules for the past very many dozen patches, and this is because Wukong has the ability to snowball the earliest of any of these roles in the mid lane. As early as level 2, Wukong can probably kill his opponent if it's a mage or an assassin because those champions tend to be squishier. Whereas in the jungle, while you can still do these same things, jungle requires a little bit more map knowledge, which a lot of players just don't have, and so they just don't do it. Whereas in the mid lane, if you see a squishy mage right in front of you, you're just going to try and kill them, because that's what Wukong's all about. And top lane, once again, they're just too tanky for you to do that quickly. And so with that in mind, Wukong does really well against mages, and he is really well against assassins too. But the reality is regardless of what matchup it is in the mid lane, if Wukong falls behind, he will have the exact same problem that he has in the top lane, where he's just stuck at the tower, farming, getting the scraps that he can, that the tower isn't going to take for itself. And Wukong will have a very similar difficulty as well when it comes to fighting back against them, since he doesn't really have the ability to get out of the fight once he commits. So the same themes are going to come up here, where Wukong will struggle at farming, he will struggle at trading, and he will struggle at juking. And really his only opportunity to succeed in the mid lane is if he gets ahead early through a level or so, and then from there wins the fight and repeats that process for the rest of the game. What I think will make it so that Wukong is better in these ways with my rework is now Wukong has the tools to farm. We mentioned this in the top lane. Wukong has a better ability to trade with both assassins and mages, keeping his distance from the assassins and hitting them with his Q. But also, if the assassin does decide to engage on Wukong, now Wukong has an easier time getting away with the use of his Nimbus Strike. And finally, against mages, generally speaking, those are the best matchups for Wukong, but if he's against a mage now, he does have the ability to fight back with a little bit of range. Maybe he won't compete with the champions like Lux and Xerath, but really, who does? Wukong isn't expected to be a sniper, but having a little bit of range so that if they do get too close, Wukong can catch them off guard and engage from there is good, rather than Wukong being forced to dash in first to start any fight against these mages. It gives Wukong the opportunity to go less than all in, poke down his opponent, and from there decide what he wants to do with the lane, rather than having to go Nimbus Strike first just because that's the only ranged spell he really has to get the fight started, and from there just hope that he can win all in once he's engaged. When playing as mid lane Wukong, if the lane's going sour, you have the option of going bottom lane to maybe snowball that way. Maybe you invade their jungle and you have the option of going to either their red jungle or their blue jungle, or you can just go back top lane even though you're playing mid lane. Whereas if you're playing top lane Wukong, it's very, very challenging to roam really anywhere in that losing lane. You can of course go mid, you can of course go to one of the sides of the jungle, but that's like half the options that you're given mid lane, and this is one of the reasons why you see mid lane Wukong's win rate being much higher, usually compared to top lane, is although they're pretty similar in playstyle, both pretty easy, the matchups in top lane are tougher for Wukong in most cases, and even if you are losing the mid lane, you have way more options of where you can go to recover. This now brings us to a mid lane summary, where a lot of the information will be the same as top lane, but we have to still ask the same questions of, does this rework give Wukong more options to be successful? And would it be oppressive? Would it be OP? Well, the answer for will it give him more options is absolutely. A lot of these same options are being presented with this rework, whether it's top lane or mid lane, where now Wukong has the choice of effectively farming, trading, juking, or going all in. Current Wukong, when it comes to mid lane play, has a lot of the same weaknesses that top lane Wukong does, but one advantage he did have that we touched on is it's a lot easier to roam as mid lane Wukong. So now, with this rework, of course, a lot of these problems are resolved. But when we look at Wukong in the mid lane, if he gets ahead, would he be a problem? And I would actually say that his weaknesses are actually even more standout here than they are in the top lane, to kind of compensate for Wukong's extra strength in roaming that he would probably have pre and post rework. And these weaknesses are that his skills can be easily evaded. I mean, these mages are still going to outrange Wukong both with his Q and his Nimbus Strike, but when it comes to these assassins, it'll be much more punishing for Wukong to have them engage on Wukong, because once they're in his face, his reaching strike will not be in range to get the CC and armor shred, so Wukong will be a lot more vulnerable against these champions who get into his face. Not to mention as well, if they get into his face and he uses his decoy in a panic, it's going to be a lot easier for these opponents to actually find the real Wukong, because the real Wukong won't be invisible for as long. So there's a lot more opportunities for people to take advantage of a novice Wukong post-rework. Being that my Wukong has its weaknesses stand out the most in the mid lane against these mid lane champions, I think it's important to note that one of Wukong's greatest assets when playing mid lane before and after this rework, if it comes to be, is his ability to roam. We talked about it earlier, and I do believe that with my rework, it has the biggest threat of being an oppressive part of this kit, and that's why I think it's so important that if Wukong is going to get this design and have the ability to Nimbus ride into fights and make plays and roam as such, it's important that he can't do it too early. I think it's important because if Wukong's able to go bottom lane level 6 after playing mid lane with his ultimate, hop to a wall with his passive, and use his Nimbus ride at such a great distance that the bottom lane has no ability to react being tower doven by a Wukong level 6, that's a problem. So I think it's really important that the distance Wukong can use his Nimbus ride early on in the game is reasonable enough that bottom lanes can see it coming and react and get the heck out of there and dodge. Because if they have no ability to react because it comes from the Dragon Pit, for example, or even the Tri-Brush, that is a problem. The last of the roles we'll be looking at closely here today is, of course, Wukong Jungle. Now, in the jungle, Wukong comes with a few problems. The first of which I want to get out of the way right away is that Wukong is the Monkey King, the king of the jungle, and yet his mobility within the jungle is embarrassing. And with my rework, of course, having that passive, he now has that mobility within the jungle issue solved, which I think is very important. The next thing to note is Wukong's ability to clear the jungle. I believe Wukong either needs Tiamat, or he needs to snowball, or he needs to just ignore his jungle and keep killing champions and keep being useful. Otherwise, his ability to clear the jungle is just not optimal. And to kind of fix that, of course, we have a little bit more AoE damage in our Q now. Being with the long-range reach and strike, you can hit multiple monsters in the jungle, but specifically his Nimbus Strike now can hit more than just 3 targets. And I think that's very important to buff up Wukong's clears. So that is definitely an improvement. The next thing to note is Wukong's ability to handle enemy junglers when he's being invaded, when he faces them in the river, his ability to 1v1. And frankly, if Wukong's winning, he tends to do just fine currently. But if he's behind, he has no ability to use his Nimbus Strike defensively to get out of the fight, and most other junglers either have a dash to go over walls or get away, or ability to hop away, something just to say, you know, I don't want that, and they leave. Wukong doesn't have that. All he has is his decoy, and most players, the average player, can see right through that charade, so that decoy really doesn't do much. And if the opponent wants to find the Wukong, they've got a pretty good chance at finding him even if he is invisible, because they know exactly when that decoy has been used. Being able to fix that with my Wukong design is a huge step forward, since now Wukong can use his Nimbus Strike defensively to say, you know what, I don't want that fight, and just leave. He can also use his Q defensively in such a way that he uses the reaching strike to CC his opponent and lock them up and say, even though I got you stunned and I got you vulnerable, I don't want that, and he can leave. So that's very important for Wukong, I think, to have. And the last thing, of course, is his ability to enable ganks. Wukong can make ganks happen. He can come off as a very surprising presence with his stealth, but being that is nerfed, it's important, I think, with my rework that Wukong is still able to enable ganks through CC. And he has that now with his Q, getting that stun in there. And of course, if he is using his Nimbus Ride combo, he is able to create that knockup. But admittedly, that will be difficult to do in the early game, and so it's not really a huge factor. That's more of a late game topic. And this then brings up the question is, will all these changes, giving Wukong all these options, will this be broken for Wukong Jungle? And the reality is no, it won't, because Wukong's ability to CC his opponent can be evaded. And Wukong will continue to be vulnerable in his own jungle, because if an opponent jungler comes in, or an enemy assassin comes in, or really anybody, if they catch Wukong trying to clear his jungle, using his Nimbus Strike to clear up all the little monsters, he no longer has that Nimbus Strike to use to escape. And with that in mind, Wukong's options are really left to, can I use my passive? Probably not, the fight's already begun, and if that's the case, Wukong's taking damage, his passive is useless. And so then he has to rely on juking with his decoy, and that just comes down to the wit of the players. And if Wukong's already being caught, his odds are not looking so good. The last thing to mention, I already mentioned with mid lane, and it's just super important that I emphasize that the potential for ganks and tower dives and rotations and all these kind of things could be very oppressive if Nimbus Ride is not tuned properly. I put that in the mid lane one, and I'm putting it here again. This rework being balanced completely rides on the way they tune this spell. Pun intended. The final point of discussion now is, how would Wukong behave outside of the laning phase? How does he do in team fights? How does he split push? Can he siege with his team? Can he control objectives? Can he make picks at the same level that he can now? These are all really late game focused topics that I want to bring up here and kind of create a contrast between current Wukong and my design of the Wukong rework, but also looking at, of course, those same questions of, will this be an opportunity for Wukong to have more options? And would this be oppressive? Would this be too good in the late game? So to start, team fights. Wukong's teamfight ability is very good currently, but I would argue that it would be weaker with my changes, but only to a small margin. And this is because Wukong's ability to engage teamfights out of nowhere is a little bit too good. If Wukong gets ahead and uses his decoy effectively to stealth for the 1.5 seconds it provides him, he can come out of nowhere, engaging with a targeted Nimbus Strike, and from there, that's all she wrote. He can use the rest of his spells in really any way he wants, but because he's in the middle of their team with his Nimbus Strike, he's probably pressed R, he's probably hit his Q on somebody, and if not, then that's a slight mechanical error on his part, but even then, using his Nimbus Strike followed by his ultimate is usually enough to win him the teamfight, provided he's winning. And if he's not winning, then he's still set up a great teamfight for his team, so This is Wukong's greatest strength pre-rework, and post-rework, Wukong would be able to do the exact same combo. However, his Nimbus Strike is no longer targeted, so he's going to have to aim it and be precise. But beyond that, if Wukong decides not to use Nimbus Strike and chooses to use his passive and Nimbus Ride in instead to create a knock-up, Nimbus Ride, Crushing Blow combo, crushing down, and using that knock-up, the Nimbus Ride has more range than the Nimbus Strike, so being able to get in range quickly with that ride would actually enable Wukong to have a pretty good engage with his Q. And beyond that, his ultimate will do more damage now against these tankier champions, and just in general, because of course we are mixing some percentage health damage with the base damage. So I think Wukong will have a little bit more difficult time getting into the backline and getting these engages off post-rework, but he'll still be able to do it just as well, if not better, once he's actually there. It just won't be so free, it won't be so easy, and that will make it less oppressive, and that's team fights. Split push, currently, Wukong has a very good split push. He's able to shred through towers very effectively. He's able to clear waves relatively effectively with a Tiamat, but otherwise, his wave clear is a little bit weak, so I think it would be good for Wukong to have a little bit more wave clear, to push these waves up faster, making his split push better, and maybe Wukong, with my design, wouldn't have as good of a tower taking ability, because he would probably have lower attack speed, so his tower taking might be a little bit weaker, but that's a small sacrifice in order for Wukong to have the ability to escape. The biggest weakness Wukong has while split pushing currently is when he's pushed up like that on his own, or even with teammates. If he gets overwhelmed with opponents, he has no ability to get away unless he makes a miraculous juke, which really comes down to his opponents being confused, just being outwitted. And frankly, Wukong deserves the ability to, if he sees the opponents coming, even if they are faster than him, Wukong should be able to hop onto a wall and Nimbus Ride away. This is the sort of thing that a lot of top laners have the ability to do. Kled can ult away, GP can lay his ult down, he has high base movement speed and has the ability to see his opponents who are trying to come after him with his powder kegs. Jax can hop away, Udyrs can run really fast. Nasus doesn't have as easy ability to get away, but he does have a Wither, so that definitely does help. Tryndamere can spin away, Garen can run away, Master Yi can run away, Riven can Broken Wings away. All these champions who are common split pushers have abilities to get away once they have pushed up that far, and Wukong just doesn't have this. If there's a target to dash to, sure, but really all Wukong really has is his decoy, and that really comes down to his opponents just being gullible, and that's not enough. So these changes would make Wukong split pushing a little bit less effective when it comes to the actual tower taking, but it would allow him to get away. He can kind of play with them a little bit and back off slightly. The next point of discussion is Wukong making picks. I do believe Wukong's ability to make picks will be significantly weaker, but still reasonable enough that he can do it. And this is because currently Wukong's ability to destroy somebody who's caught out of position is a little bit too good. This is because Wukong has two targeted abilities, one being his Nimbus Strike and the second being his Crushing Blow. Taking away that targeted ability with his Nimbus Strike means Wukong can do this, pretty much the same stuff when it comes to making picks, but he has to aim that Nimbus Strike. And if he misses that, the pick's over, Wukong's in the wrong spot, and he has to find a way to juke his way out, if not burn his ultimate to get to safety. And that's not something Wukong wants to do. So this gives a little bit of counterplay to his opponents who see the Nimbus Strike coming, they can flash to safety, they can dash away, they can make a little bit of space between them. Whereas right now, Nimbus Strike, once it's midair, it always does damage, no matter what, and that's a bit of a problem. The next thing to discuss is Wukong's ability to siege. Currently, Wukong will hit the towers with his team and he'll break them pretty quickly, and he'll follow up engages, whether it's on his own team that gets engaged on, or whether his own team engages. But other than that, Wukong just stands there in sieges. He doesn't really do anything. He just kind of watches until something happens that he can be a part of. And this is something that would be slightly different with this new reworked Wukong, is his siege will be slightly better because he can use his 650 range Q to catch people out. And if he catches somebody and gets them stunned, that is immediately an engage for his team that they can follow up on and allows his team to pressure the fight, and Wukong can be a bit of a playmaker in that way. And this kind of brings up something that's very important, that is exceptionally vital about Wukong's play now, is Wukong isn't a feast or famine champion no longer. Currently, if Wukong gets ahead, he can go where he pleases, Mundo style, and get done what he wants to get done, engage on whoever he wants to engage on, but if he falls behind, he's kind of just fodder. He's kind of just there to do his best, but he's probably going to die and not get much done. But now if Wukong is really behind, he is able to sit further back, play it safer, and just use his Q for utility and help his team catch people out. And after he gets a few assists, maybe gets some last hits that he steals with that Q long range, he can then actually get more courageous and jump into the fight again and make these bigger plays. Wukong now has an entryway to get back into the game. The last point of discussion when it comes to Wukong in the late game is his ability to control objectives. And this is something that's a little bit better now because of his mobility, but at the end of the day, Wukong is not Cho'Gath. Wukong is not Nunu. His ability to control dragons and control Baron is not as good, but his ability to hop in and out of the Baron pit and the Dragon pit does enable some safety for Wukong to attempt to control these objectives so that if the worst does come, he can just hop out of the pit, and that is very, very vital. All in all, Wukong has more options when it comes to team fighting, split pushing, making picks, sieging, and controlling objectives, but his opponents have many options as well when it comes to managing Wukong's oppression. And that pretty much wraps up the Wukong rework. Obviously, I did a lot of talking, but if you guys have any questions about anything that might be unclear, feel free to ask me in the comment section. I'll do my very best to answer. Of course, with this video, my goal is to get Riot to notice what my design is, and I would love it if they would consider making my design the Wukong rework, but with that said, I would not be at all offended if Wukong did receive a rework that wasn't exactly what I suggested. If any of my ideas are used, I would be very flattered, but I would not be offended if none of them were used. I, at the end of the day, just want Wukong to receive a rework so that he is a viable member of the League of Legends for higher levels of play, and I also just want him to look dope. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like rating. I put my heart and soul into this one, if that much isn't already obvious, so please do support the video. I would really appreciate it, and subscribe for more videos, and I will see you guys all on the next one.